Good morning and welcome to the Lightcast studios for this employment situation live analysis, also known as the monthly jobs report, and gives us a glimpse into the health of our economy and the labor market. On this July 7th, 2023, I'm your host, Christopher Laney, and I am joined by the dynamic duo of Lightcast economists. We have senior labor economist Ron Hetrick and senior labor economist Rusha Van Kudre. Ron, Rusha, welcome to the studio.
Morning.
Good morning.
Ron, Rusha, it's so good to see you. It just seems like all eyes have been on this jobs report. It seems like that every month, but it seems like this month specifically, everybody's been talking about it just a little bit more. I want to get your first take on what you are seeing. Rusha, I'm going to start with you. What just popped out to you in this report?
I think the first thing, everyone was looking at was that jobs number, right? Because we've been expecting a slowdown for quite some time, and then the numbers kept coming back stronger than everyone was expecting. And for the first time, I think we've actually seen this number come down in a way that felt meaningful and was actually below what everyone was expecting. So the number of jobs added was 209,000. And economists had really been expecting a number closer to 225,000. So this is the first time that it's actually below expectations. And it's actually the lowest monthly gain since December of 2020.
Ron, how about, sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say the other interesting thing about that is they also revised down the last 2 months. So they were originally about 100,000 jobs predicted were higher than what we're actually seeing now. And so I think all of this really does show that slowing of the labor market that the Fed has been waiting for.
Ron, how about you? Anything that popped out to you in this specific report on your first take?
Yeah, I think initially I've been going immediately to things like labor force participation, labor force. We continue to see this kind of very slow growth in our labor force, which is what we want. I think inside of that, there's going to be some things that we're going to want to talk about a little bit later, but I'm encouraged to see that part going on. What's interesting is the labor force participation rate has not moved, I think, in 4 or 5 months. It's stuck at 62.6, still not back to the level, and I don't think we'll get back to that level. But I think what we're seeing is we're getting helped by the small boost in the labor force. So it's not surprising to me that the payroll jobs gain was more muted. I liked to see the revision down last month. I never really thought that number felt right to me. It felt a little too big considering how many people were able to add to the labor force. So this all kind of feels a little bit more appropriate this month.
Ron, it seemed like at the end of last year and even the beginning of this year, a lot of economists were giving analysis of 100% of a recession going into later this year. Here we are. We're in the second part of 2023 now. As you look at this report, like Rusha said, 225,000 was around what most were predicting. We came just under that. Are we starting to see the labor market become a bit more predictable? And is this the soft landing that the Fed is looking for?
I think what's tough about this is when we talk about what people are looking for, what we're looking for is some level of slack, right? So we're trying to ease off on wages, right? If we can ease wage pressure, then we can probably get a better job of reining in inflation. So when the Fed's talking about a soft landing, they're talking about, are you able to rein in inflation, but not, destroy everything? And, a lot of what we're seeing right now is, yes, we actually are seeing inflation ease, but we still have an incredibly tight labor market. The Fed's goal was not, I'm sure they didn't want to see the unemployment rate go down this month, but this is kind of maybe our new norm, sitting underneath 4%. I think this is something that I'm kind of getting a little bit more comfortable with. Maybe they're getting a little bit more comfortable with. I don't think you can really injure this labor force. Consumer spending is just still way too strong to do that. And I think you see it in the smatterings of the different industries and the directions that they were going in this report this month.
Well, Rusha, speaking of different industries, when you're looking at this report, are there some of those biggest losers or biggest winners, if you want to say, in this report that really popped out to you when it came to the industry-specific data?
So the biggest gains in industries were in healthcare and social assistance, which gained 65,000 jobs. Government, which gained 60,000, and then construction gained 23,000. But what you'll notice about all of those numbers is, none of those are particularly large numbers, right? And so I would say there wasn't any really huge gains. I think the healthcare number is nice. It's actually higher than the average number of jobs added in healthcare per month, which is usually around 40,000. So I think that's definitely a good thing we're seeing. The government number is adding, but that tends to do usually more with, seasonal hiring than really anything else. And it is still below the pandemic number, pre-pandemic number. And then the actual only real loser was trade and transportation, which lost 22,000 jobs. And so I would say, I think, given that everything is slowing down, these numbers are kind of where you would expect, right? You would see if there's going to be any job gains, it's going to be kind of more in some of the public sector jobs and, healthcare where we always need jobs. And so I think this was kind of played out in terms of people's expectations.
Ron, it seemed like last month when we looked at some of the job gains, it was really related to a lot of those frontline type industry positions related to those industries. What did you see in the industry data in this analysis? What's your thoughts on what was happening?
Yeah, we actually got a little bit of a surprise this time. Restaurants have been really driving gains. In the past year, it's almost been a race between healthcare and, hotels and restaurants. And we actually saw restaurants go down a little bit, which is a bit of a surprise to me. I think there have been a lot of hiring lately. Maybe they're just kind of catching up to that number. But that one just seemed a little bit odd. Retail trade has been doing a little bit weaker. If you look at this gain, this kind of 209,000 gain, part of that gain, why we didn't see a more explosive number is that these industries that had been contributing quite a bit didn't, like restaurants and like retail. Inside of retail, what's interesting is we're continuing to see this shift away from what we saw during the pandemic. And now we're like a couple of years into this. Things like building supplies, they going to the store to get things to help in your home renovations and such. That industry has been taking it on the chin now for quite a while. And as Risha mentioned, warehousing has been going down now pretty consistently. It had an odd gain last month, as did temp help last month. Yet those both reversed into more of a line of what we've been seeing. So I think those trends are continuing along. Just a little bit of a surprise with restaurants, but I'm not overly concerned about that just yet.
Rusha, in yesterday's JOLTS report, we saw a small downtick in individuals choosing not to switch jobs. Related back to that predictability of the labor market, do you believe that individuals are still a bit more apprehensive about switching jobs because of the uncertainty of a potential recession that could still happen?
I mean, I think what we saw that small downtick, but the problem is what we also saw was that increase in quits by quite a substantial amount, right? And so I feel like the fact that that number is going up in a time when maybe if you thought that, things were cooling down a lot and people didn't feel like there were opportunities, I think that would be the first number really that you would see fall, right? And the fact that it rose quite substantially, I think kind of shows that workers still are feeling some freedom. Obviously that's going to vary industry by industry. But given the fact that, yes, job openings came down yesterday, they're still very, very high, right? And that unemployment number is still really low. So I'm not seeing any clear indication yet that people are getting very worried.
Can I just add?
Thing that we did notice, which maybe plays to the other side of that, is there was in this report a fairly substantial increase in the number of workers who are employed part-time due to economic reasons. It went up by about 452,000. And so I think, it's possible that maybe in those workers who already have less flexibility, we're seeing some of that there. But I think overall, we're definitely seeing still a lot of movement in the labor market.
Ron, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, just actually two things. One is, we did see that quit number go up in the JOLTS report. And what's so funny about that is that report actually lags a month. If you look at this employment report, when you break down the reasons that people say, why am I unemployed? The people who say they're unemployed because they left their job actually was one of our biggest gainers. And the ones who said they were permanently laid off actually took a fall. So this is certainly not consistent with a lead into like a downturn because people are still quitting their jobs. So I think that's, part of the thing. And just real quickly on the part-time, when you look at people who say they're taking part-time work because it's the only job they can find, it's really about a million versus the people who are choosing part-time, which is like 22 million. I don't want people to get the impression that we're all of a sudden we're bereft of full-time jobs. It's still something that there's a lot of opportunity out there for people, maybe not for everyone, but it's still, a pretty generous economy.
Ron, when you look at the employment gains or losses among specific demographic groups, in this report, what are you seeing? Any one or multiple groups stick out to you?
Yes, there's two things that have to be said that people really need to understand. Number one, this is our first of the summer months, right? These are when kids are coming out of school. taking jobs. Our labor force of 16 and 19-year-olds has fallen for 4 straight months. I think, basically since February, the labor force of 16 and 19-year-olds has been falling. So has the labor force participation rate. So going in the summer, this was not the move we wanted to see. So if you're a small business, if you're an employer, who's employing teenagers, seeing less and less of them coming into the labor force, and this consistent pattern over the past several months is definitely not a trend that we wanted to see. Another thing that really sticks out about this report, our overall labor force gain was about 180,000. The labor force gain for Hispanics was 250,000, which means pretty much all of our labor force gain could almost be explained just through the Hispanic population. So whether that's immigrants or whether that's domestic, is certainly a trend that we're trying to pay attention to. This is something we've been monitoring. How are we meeting our labor force shortages this year? And I think that this is one of the things that we are definitely seeing in this data.
Staying on this topic for just a moment, it seemed like over the past couple of months, we've been seeing kind of this discouraging connection towards specific groups finding it harder to navigate the labor market. For example, individuals with disabilities or individuals who do not have a college degree. What are you seeing specifically in this month's report? Is that still the ongoing trend of what we've been seeing over the last couple of months? Ron, to you. Sorry.
Oh, sorry. No, that was two. It's so hard to look into these numbers and see those kind of things. One of the things that we've been encouraging employers when things have been very tight is, to start working more actively, whether it be formerly incarcerated people, whether it be people with disabilities. It's always kind of hard to see into these numbers and see what's happening. When we look at the trends of people who are out of the labor force, it's still largely being driven by retirees, but that second group, if of people who reported a reason, this is even as of, I think in May, 14% of people who out of the labor force were saying because they were sick or disabled. So I think there's still a pretty large chunk of people who aren't able to work right now. I think it's something we can continue to work on.
Before I get to both of your final thoughts, I had a question for both of you. Rusha, I'm going to start with you. In the coming months, what are you looking for in the labor market? Are there specific indicators and or reports that you want to keep your eye on that's really going to help us tell the story of the health of our labor market?
I think we're definitely going to be interested to keep our eyes on those numbers for quits and layoffs. We finally saw that information or number jump up in last month's JOLTS, and I think we'll be interested to see if that continues playing out or if that's petering out, I think, as some people are expecting. The other thing I'm interested in is, keeping an eye on inflation. So it's been coming down slowly. It's kind of steadied out and evened out now for the past couple months, but we know that we still want it to come down some. So I think in combination of looking at kind of the hourly wage, to see if that continues or at least starts falling again, maybe a little bit, as well as looking at the CPI indicators, which have been holding steady for quite a bit now, and to see if those continue to come down. I think that's really going to determine what happens next with the Fed and interest rates.
Ron, how about you? Are there specific indicators and or reports that you're trying to keep an eye on in terms of what is happening in our economy?
Oh, it's all about consumer spending for me. So it's a 3.6% unemployment rate. There's a lot of people working in this country. They're making money. They're spending money. As long as people spend money, this economy is going nowhere. And I think that that's one of the things that all the predictions that people have been doing this year, people have kind of taken their eye off the ball. And the ball is, the large percentage of our GDP is driven by consumer spending. And, what's interesting is durable goods manufacturing actually went up this month in employment. If you look at the new orders reports for durables, when you kind of look at those core durables, when you exclude defense products and such, new orders went up in May. This is still an economy that has money and is spending money. And I'm looking at that. Another thing is Risha mentioned the CPI. If you look at PPI, and this is the PPI of products that manufacturers sell to each other, the year over year change for that went to 0 last month. So that actually had been in the sky. It was basically so high up, and it's been working its way down, and it finally worked its way to 0% year over year. So if they're not experiencing input cost increasing, then they're going to not have to increase prices as well. So I've been watching those types of things to kind of see what's probably coming down the line over the next several months.
Rusha, let's start with you. Your final thoughts on today's report.
I think overall, this was a report that kind of showed what people were hoping to see. And, because we're in this sort of a different climate right now where things slowing down is kind of a good thing in many ways for people, in terms of hoping that inflation will continue to come down and we can pause on interest rates. I think that was a good thing. I think, the concern that is still there is this is still a very, very tight labor market. And we are not really seeing any signs of that letting up in any sort of meaningful way. And I was talking with a small business owner the other day who was asking, what does all of this mean for small business owners? And I think, the issue is unemployment's really low. Small businesses have a hard time keeping up with the benefits and wages offered by large businesses. Openings are still really high. As we saw, quits are high. People are still moving. And then on top of that, it's really hard to borrow money. So I'm not sure we're really going to be seeing much relief for those small business owners. But it seems like the economy and the labor market are holding strong.
One of the benefits I read today related to small businesses was related to the tech industry and how many of those layoffs earlier in the year, it was small businesses that was benefiting from that talent.
Yep.
Right. So I guess that is one positive in terms of what we've seen so far this year. Ron, how about you? Your final thoughts on today's report?
Yeah, the most important thing is, and something I keep trying to tell people over and over, if you go back any time in our history, if you were to flash any of those people and take them to now, they would look at today's economy and be like, this is absolutely incredible. This is an incredibly strong labor market, no matter how you slice it. And I think sometimes we get stuck in these kind of micro changes from month to month, and we're looking for weakness because we know these interest rates have been going up. But let's make no mistake, as Ruth just said, this is a really great labor market as it stands right now. I just see nothing fundamentally wrong with it whatsoever, at least not at this point in time.
Ron, Rusha, thank you for today's analysis. Final reminder, a final thing to say is this is a great labor market. That's a great takeaway from both of you today. For more information about today's analysis or Lightcast data, you can visit lightcast.io. Thank you for joining us today, and we will see you again next month.